And so if you're a math teacher or you're a social studies teacher, you may need to get really well versed in trauma informed care or in how to de-escalate a student who's becoming escalated for something that might not have to do anything with your lessons or anything with your content. Because I love working in education. I love working with students. I love working in schools. I want more people to come into the profession and feel good about the work that they're doing. But the matter of fact is that a lot of people don't feel that way right now. I see a lot of educators sticking with the job longer than they should. And I think that that is probably the biggest disservice that we can offer for our students and for our teams and for our schools.
Jake, welcome to the podcast, Doorways to Learning. We are opening up more doors to educational information, adventures, and I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Same goes. Same goes for me. I wanted to take a little different turn today and not talk about so much methodology and what you're doing in the classroom content-wise, but what an educator looks like. I'm really fascinated by you, and I think one of the reasons we connected is because you are very transparent about your journey, and you're also very introspective. And I always say that reflection is our superpower as educators because we can pivot and make life better for ourselves and for our students simply by being introspective, reflecting on what works and what doesn't. And I love that that's part of your journey. So how about if we start there? How about if you tell us briefly your journey to where you start as an educator and where you are now, and then we'll dive into some more things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in education for about 10 years. And in that time, I've held a number of jobs and kind of done all kinds of stuff. And I was in a self-contained classroom for students with social and emotional disabilities. And as soon as I got into the classroom, and it might be a bit of an exaggeration to say as soon as I got in there, I knew I wasn't cut out for teaching. It was not something that just kind of made sense to me. And I saw what teachers had to go through. And I was like, I don't know if I could do this. This is kind of scary. And I think a lot of people end up in that position, when they're in their first teaching job and they're like, holy crap, what did I sign up for? I was lucky enough that I got a taste of it and I decided to pivot. I still wanted to be in schools, but I knew that what I had to offer wasn't necessarily the instruction. It was a lot of the peripheries, everything else that schools are expected to do. And so as I kind of started down my career, I started just learning more and more about the way that schools operate and seeing people in their various roles, learning about like what makes a really good educator. And I also started learning about what makes educators burn out really quickly. And that's kind of where I've been the most interested in education is this journey of how do we come into this profession for the long run, for the long haul? How do we make it sustainable? Because right now it's not super sustainable. And so my journey was I got burnt out really bad. And it happened at the school that I was at, the first school that I was at. I went on to be on the crisis response team after being in the classroom for a couple of years. And with that, my day was just putting out fires all day. I was the person you called when things weren't going well, when you needed help in your classroom, when students were wigging out, when they were having a really hard time. And that took a huge toll on me. And just because of the environment that we were in, that was just what you came to expect every day. And so I was running in to fires all day, putting them out. And it started really, really impacting me in a negative way.
You were saying I wasn't cut out to be a teacher. What does that mean to you?
When I thought about being a teacher, I kind of had this idealized version that I think a lot of people have of like, I'm going to go in, give the perfect lesson. The kids are going to love it. They're going to be so engaged. And that was not the reality of what I was seeing. I was seeing people working so hard to make so little progress to I got to see people teach incredible lessons to a room full of crickets. Like nobody cared. And that was really disheartening. So when I thought about what I could provide in a school, I started really thinking about my skill set and the way that I can connect with people to help make everything else a little bit easier. I worked really well, like one-on-one with students, kind of getting them back on track and into a position where they could access their learning. when kids were dysregulated, when kids weren't in a space, when they weren't school ready, my job was to figure out how to get them at least to some level of baseline. So I was kind of entering the role of more of a mental health provider and things like that. Uh, so when I say I wasn't cut out to be a teacher, it's less so that I don't think I could handle it, but more so that I found something that I had that I could offer a lot better. I wanted to focus more on like how do we create an environment and how do we work with our students on a relationship level and on a one-on-one and on taking everything that they're walking into the door with and addressing that so that they can be in the classroom and that someone who's more qualified in instruction than me can deliver that to them. So what I really wanted to do in education was take a step out of the classroom and work with students so that when they enter the classroom, that teacher's job is a lot easier.
What you're talking about is exactly what my ideal learning environment is, which is project-based learning, phenomenon-based learning, if we want to get more specific. And as I listen to you explain why it wasn't working, that you didn't want to go in and speak to a whole group that wasn't receptive to what you had to say, I realize that in the future, and hopefully a very near future, we're not going to have classrooms like that because it doesn't work. What, in your opinion, is an educator? What is our role in the school? Are we models? How much are we models for our students? And what is it that they need from us?
Yeah, that's a big question. I
Yeah,
think,
but you
uh,
can get
yeah, well,
it.
I think when I think about what it means to be an educator, I don't think you can have just one answer of what that looks like. I think when students walk into a building, these days we need to have educators who are specialized in all kinds of things. And that looks like multiple people getting really, really good at one specific thing or a couple specific things, being on the same page and being on the same team. But in my building, one thing we've really worked on is kind of separating who and how students can receive their services from. So, what I mean by that is when they walk into a classroom, if they're dysregulated, need to get back on track so that they can actually genuinely learn, if they need more than what a teacher can reasonably provide, we're taking them out of the classroom to see someone like me or see our counselor or see our mental health provider so that they can hopefully in a short amount of time get re-regulated and then get back into the classroom. And now I should preface that with I work in an alternative school for students who have been expelled or are at risk of expulsion. So what it looks like for me is totally different. An educator these days has to be so well versed in so many different things that it's really exhausting. So how can we kind of as a team decide the skills that we all need to have, but who's going to be really, really good at certain things? And so if you're a math teacher or you're a social studies teacher, you may need to get really well versed in trauma-informed care or in how to de-escalate a student who's becoming escalated for something that might not have to do anything with your lessons or anything with your content. But I do think that there is a limit to that to also know what can you do in your classroom, and then when do you have to hand it off to somebody who can do a little bit more. And I think that's kind of a lot of what we're really struggling with right now is finding that balance between having all educators be really well versed in a lot of stuff that we're not used to, but then still being able to provide a high quality education across the board.
And I think there's a huge assumption about how much training teachers get. And we really are woefully untrained because we mostly are trained in content. And yet for special needs students, there's so many things we would benefit us to know, benefit our students to know. And you say you're an alternative high school. And I would say that in any mainstream high school, we're going to have the same profile. Maybe half the students are going to have the profile that you do, but the others are just better at pretending that they're okay. And there's so many emotional problems that we don't address, and they're getting so good at covering up. I believe that we are models for our students to a certain extent in the school. How much are we models outside of the school? And I'm going to give you an example before you answer this. We talked very briefly about this before we pressed record. This comes up for me because I was first a teacher in New Mexico, and one of the teachers, and maybe this is extreme, maybe it isn't, she was a pole dancer at night. And I had no problem with that. But she was mortified that her students might find out about it. Now, that's an extreme case, but that's what she loved to do. And she was also a teacher and a good teacher. So do you find a disconnect there? Or do you think that, whatever goes outside of school, you can do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I think that we need to have a very clear understanding that we are not our jobs, period. We are, as teachers, as educators, as counselors, as administrators, we're a very integral part of our community, but that doesn't mean that that gets to define us. So if we have things that we enjoy doing, hobbies that we have, side hustles that we have outside of school, things that don't necessarily align with what we do on our day to day, I think that's totally okay. And in fact, I'd even encourage it because the messaging that a lot of people are getting these days is that when educators show up, they have to be perfect. They have to give everything to their job and take nothing for themselves. A lot of people are trained that, and it subconsciously, not necessarily like this is exactly what you do and this is what you learn in school, but the messaging that we're giving to our teachers, to our counselors, to our facility managers, to our secretaries is that everybody else in your school comes first. And then you can take whatever's left over if there's anything left. And it really hurts me because I love working in education. I love working with students. I love working in schools. I want more people to come into the profession and feel good about the work that they're doing. But the matter of fact is that a lot of people don't feel that way right now. How do you respect the individual? And part of that is I don't care what you do outside of school. Sure, are there some PR issues that you might run into with a teacher who's a pole dancer, a teacher? I mean, we've all seen the news stories of teachers with OnlyFans, things like that. But honestly, that's not a priority for me. My priority is trying to figure out if you have something outside of school that you love to do that doesn't necessarily align, quote unquote, with your values of your job, that's fine. I think there's a fine line too. If we're going out promoting some really crazy stuff out in the community and stuff that can be harmful to others, I don't agree with that. But most of the time, these things that we're doing that people are getting in trouble for is not harming anybody.
I would love you to tell me if you can think about it, and this is not to denigrate anybody. What is one of the worst mistakes you've seen as educators in the classroom, and what are some of the most successes that you've seen?
I see a lot of educators sticking with the job longer than they should. And I think that that is probably the biggest disservice that we can offer for our students and for our teams and for our schools. And what I mean by that is that going back to my story of burnout, when I burnt out, I didn't realize it right away. I kept going and I kept showing up every day trying to do the job that I thought I could still do in the same way that I was doing a couple of years ago. And now that I've gotten some space, now that I had to quit that job, find a new one, take some space and really rebuild myself up to where I am today, I realized that burnout was negatively impacting my ability to perform my job, which directly negatively impacted my students. I was showing up and I was being more reactive and I was being less responsive to what my students' actual needs were. And I was just telling them what I wanted them to do. And I was just telling them what I needed them to do. And as you know, that does not necessarily work out. So from my perspective, one of the worst things you can do as an educator is stay in this career longer than is feasible for your own mental health and well-being. And now I think that it is recoverable to come back from burnout. I did it, and I'm pretty proud of that. It took a lot of work, but sometimes it's really, really hard to realize that you're stuck in that cycle or that you are burnt out and that you are causing a negative impact to your students in your building, because we get into this job because we place such a high value on serving others. And we place such a high value on being able to provide an incredible experience for people who really deserve it, for our students. And it's hard to separate ourselves from that identity when we need to. And so what that looks like is I've seen people be really, really mean to kids and be really like just direct and not nice with the way that they interact with kids. And at the end of the day, I don't care what a kid does, they still deserve your kindness and they still deserve your respect. They're a kid. They, to some degree, they don't know any better. And even if they do, they're impulsive. Their brains aren't fully developed. We need to understand that. And I think that when people forget that, that's the worst thing that you can do as an educator.
You should not be in the classroom if you don't want to be there, and if you're not emotionally stable. And I'm not saying that means you're crazy. It means that we need to find what brings us joy so that we can find that center no matter what happens. And it's very challenging, especially for high school teachers, high school students. They are challenging. We talked about this one time where their job is to be contentious and they are good at it, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I always insisted that they be respectful, no matter what they said, no matter what their emotion was, they needed to find a way to be respectful. And that's a life lesson. Where would you like to be in the next 10 years? Do you see yourself staying in education? What do you think?
You know, where my expertise really lies is in helping people take care of themselves so that they can keep doing this work.
So how can people find you? Perfect segue.
Yeah, perfect segue. So
Yeah.
you can find me on my website. You can find me on Instagram, jakeruzi.com. That's Ruzi is Ruzi. And for all your listeners, I'd like to provide just a little step-by-step self-care thing that I put together. And they can go to jakeruzi.com/Donna to find that.
Ooh, very nice. Very sleek.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jake. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you're dying for the listeners to know about, or can they find any more information on your page?
The one thing I would want everybody to walk away with today is that the challenges that we're facing in education are real. The struggles that our schools and our educators are facing right now, it's real. It's happening, and you're not alone in facing those. So find somebody who just makes you not feel alone in that. And I think that we can do some really, really great work to kind of turn some of these things around, because the problems that we're facing do have solutions. We can make progress towards making working in education easier and more enjoyable, because sometimes it's not. That's okay. But I truly believe that we can get to a point where working in education is so much fun, is so rewarding, that the conversation that current educators have makes non-educators want to jump into the field as fast as they possibly can.
And people can find you at your own podcast, and you're doing that daily, aren't you?
Yeah, daily. So my podcast, thanks for the segue and for the promo here. Educator State of Mind. You can find it on your favorite podcasting app, and I am on there daily, because if you're showing up for your students every day, I want to show up for you every day.
Oh, nice. Very nice way to end it. Thank you so much, Jake. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Donna.
This has been such a treat to speak with Jake Ruzi on Doorways to Learning. His story of very intentionally moving in and out of the classroom is nothing less than inspiring. For those of us with a passion for this profession, just like Jake, we need to find our place in the educational world where it's most appropriate, and reflecting on what fuels us inside and outside of the school borders is what our work is. Jake's introspection and transparency is important and empowering. So please find him at his podcast and website and download his self-care document so you feel supported as well. That would make him incredibly happy, and me as well. Join us again next week for more introspective conversations like this one, and I can't wait to see you next week. For more educational tips like this, please press like and subscribe.